Let's talk about life, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the truth and consciousness, divinity. Let's talk about God. Let's talk about love. Welcome to Spiritual Nerd, and I'm your host, Ninette Terhart, and today we are geeking out with Nirmala. And thank you so much for hanging out with me today, Nirmala, on the show. Great to see you. And for those of you that are just tuning in, I would like to share a little bit about Nirmala. He is an author and a spiritual teacher in the Advaita tradition of non-dual spiritual wisdom. He is the author of several spiritual books, including Nothing Personal and Living from the Heart. And since 1998, he has offered satsang throughout the United States, Canada, Australia, and the United Kingdom to hundreds of groups and thousands of people. Nirmala also offers individual spiritual mentoring sessions in person or over the phone to people all over the world. So that is very cool. Nirmala, welcome and thank you. And I wanted to start off by saying you have such a gentle and calm demeanor. Was this something that you've always sort of had, or is this something that you sort of settled into over time?
I would say it's deepened over time, and definitely deepened with the kind of spiritual shifts that I experienced.
Now, could you share some of the highlights of your journey to now?
It's a funny thing to say, but I think every moment is a highlight of the spiritual journey, because there's nothing outside of it, nothing that isn't actually part of the unfolding. Yeah. But then there are moments that make for a good story. Like, I had this big spiritual awakening while sitting on the banks of the Ganges River in Rishikesh, India. Late at night, I was sitting about 10 feet away from these giant rapids where the Ganges comes down out of the Himalayas, and just had this profound experience of oneness. It actually started with the rock that I was leaning on, and I felt a strange. I just had this strange shift where suddenly that rock was inside of me. It was no longer something outside of me. It was as much a part of me as my hands or my feet. And then if it was that one rock, then it was actually true of all of this big field of boulders right next to the river.
Right.
And if it was true of those boulders, it was true of the boulders on the other side of the river. And then it was obvious that the river was inside of me, which meant the entire length of the river, which meant, pretty much the entire continent of India. And it wasn't how to say it, mental or philosophical or theoretical. It was a direct felt experience that India was inside of me, that it was me as much as my hands or my feet. And then it just kept going from there. It just kept expanding to the whole planet, to the whole solar system, almost beyond what my mind could really hold, but it still was directly felt and experienced as being me. And of course, the word me didn't even make sense at that point, when it's that much of reality. To call it me doesn't really relate. But then it did this really weird thing, and this relates to what I was saying about that every moment is the spiritual journey, or every moment is a highlight, because then not only had it expanded out through space, but it kind of something like popped, and it expanded through time. So it was really viscerally obvious and clear in that moment that that's what I had always been, that there wasn't, it almost seemed like a big joke. I ended up rolling around in the gravel next to the river, laughing my head off, because it seemed like such a joke that I had ever thought there was a problem, or that I had ever suffered, because it was so obvious that that's what I had always been.
And when you experience something like that, once that how did that sort of end or sort of finalize that experience?
Oh, well, that's, again, we're back to
right.
it's all a part of the journey. It didn't end. The intensity of it's kind of a shock to your system when a realization comes that's that big and that strong. So that wears off. But in a sense, nothing was ever the same again afterwards. The direction of my life completely changed, and I, ended up doing things that I could never have imagined doing, like giving, as you mentioned, giving satsang. Though I don't actually give satsang to groups so much anymore in person. As you know, my wife and I do a thing on the weekends where we offer a kind of spiritual transmission. We call it Christ consciousness transmission. And the great thing about that is that I do it sitting in this chair in my home, so I don't have to spend so much time in airports and on airplanes going around the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Grateful to Zoom for all of that, let me tell you.
Yeah, it's awesome.
So Nirmala, let me ask you then, since then, have you had other intense experiences that have shifted as you've moved along in this plane?
Yeah, what I would say in general is that after that, but even before that, there was a buildup. But after a series of those kinds of experiences, it just becomes, though that kind of experience becomes very accessible.
Yeah.
And so then, just as I said, the intensity of it wears off, then the intensity or the novelty of it, the extraordinary becomes ordinary.
Right.
Because it's part of your, it's such a regularly occurring experience that you don't make as much note of it, I guess, in your narration of the story of me.
Right, the story of me. Well, the me, I guess, becomes less of a me.
Yeah, like I said, it gets, to me, the ideal really is a total flexibility of that sense of me. That it can dissolve, it can expand, it can merge, it can take on a specific role or identity in a moment where that's functional and necessary and helpful, and then it can drop that role or that identification in the next moment. Some people think that the ideal is to get to one of those big experiences of, again, you might want to call it know me, because it's ridiculous to think of it as me, and then like get stuck there,
right?
Stay there, which I think it probably does happen, but those people usually aren't very functional.
Right.
I mean, it's very common probably in cultures like India, where when that happens to someone and they get stuck there, then they build an ashram around you, and they feed you and fan you, and
right,
do your laundry for you, and everything is taken care of.
I love that you said about it takes on different sort of like shape-shifting, like that character in X-Men where she would shape-shift.
Yeah.
When you said that, what went off for me was like this, a little more of a leniency on having to be in that space all the time. Like so many people, I think, as they're spiritually awakening, think like you said, and I think that sort of opened up a little doorway as soon as you said that about, no, it has this functionality, clearly, because we're choosing to be on this plane, and now we can access that. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I loved that.
Yeah, well, like I said, to me, the suffering, the difficulty always comes when in a sense, we are relatively stuck in one perspective, one way of experiencing ourselves. And I think it can be just as limiting to be stuck in kind of absolute cosmic consciousness as it is obviously limiting and painful to be stuck in a negative identification with a limited story of me. But if you can't, in a sense, take on in the moment the identification as a me, then it interferes with your ability to just function in a worldly sense.
Yeah.
The suffering again comes when you get stuck, because of there's this mismatch between what's happening and what your mental story is about who I am, and this isn't supposed to be happening to me. And there can be just as many, strangely enough, just as many kind of mental stories that arise when someone is stuck in that expanded state, like they keep having to remind themselves that they are not the body, they are not this, they are not that, and it's strangely enough a similar kind of being stuck.
Yeah.
In fact, I go even further, and I suggest that our sense of me is actually itself a functional aspect of our consciousness, and that it's always, in a sense, showing us how true or how important or how relevant our experience is. And so an extremely contracted sense of me is in a sense, the right way for that me to feel when we're experiencing an extremely limited or incomplete truth. And an extremely expanded, almost like, again, boundless experience of me is the right way for that sense of self to feel when you're experiencing a boundless truth. And so you want you want this discriminating factor, this discriminating capacity of your awareness to function.
Yeah.
I always say it's like you go if you went into a store and you try on a sweater and it's obviously 10 sizes too small, you can't even get it over your head. That's the right way for that sweater to feel.
Right.
So that to not keep pulling it and to take it down and put it on the shelf and get a bigger one, right? And so because in this kind of dynamic living of our lives, we encounter all different sizes of truth. It's good to be able to tell, just like you can tell how big a piece of clothing is and whether it will fit or not.
That inner GPS.
Yeah. It's inherent in a small truth to feel contracted. Most of the time when there's a really small truth, we sense that and we just dismiss it.
Yes.
So I always say it's like the punchline of a joke. Someone's telling you a story and it's getting weirder and weirder and weirder, and then they say something that's so weird, so obviously not true, that it's like that a light bulb goes off. You contract for a second, and then you get it. Oh, it's a joke, and you're laughing.
Right.
And so that again, the only problem is if you get stuck, and that happens to us too, right? Someone's telling us a joke, and they get to the punchline, and we're like, "What? Wait! I don't get it. What? How? That's not even possible." And what are you saying? And then they go, "It's a joke."
Yeah. Yeah. I love it.
And then there's that sense of relief.
It's like a Course in Miracles when, the author says in the book, we forgot to laugh. It's so true. It's like...
Yeah, if you don't get the joke, you're stuck there.
Yes, true. What would you suggest or share with someone that's listening that is really wanting to get on this path? Like they feel the pull, but they're sort of like meditation, or what would you suggest?
It's actually very challenging to make a specific suggestion. But what I would point them to is what I was just speaking of, because not only can you trust it when your sense of self contracts, but you can trust it when your sense of self relaxes or opens or feels more flowing, more present. And so you can use that as your own kind of discrimination, your own guide to what is the appropriate practice or path or teacher or teaching. That if a teaching or a teacher or a practice is really resonates with you, who you are, where you are in that moment, there will be this sense of expansion.
Yeah.
And if it's not, it will either just not seem to be having much effect, or can actually have the opposite effect and get you very contracted and very confused. And so I have a good friend, Jeffrey Martin, who is a researcher, a neuroscientist who researches awakening. And in the process, he discovered that all of the really well-known and highly respected spiritual paths and practices, that they all work for about 5% of the people that encounter them.
Oh.
Which is, I mean, that's great for if you're one of those 5%, right?
Right.
But if you're one of the other 19 people in the room who have been, meditating even longer than that guy in the corner who's obviously having some really powerful experience, and you just keep going and going and going. He says that if you stick with it, sometimes, people stick with a path that doesn't really fit for them long enough that eventually it breaks down all their structures and they have an awakening after like 25 years.
Right.
But that's not a given, and there may be, just down the street, there may be another ashram or another zendo or another church or something that, that you could walk down there and start having a sense of this bigger truth happen much more quickly. So, so the pointer isn't to a specific practice. The pointer is to try a lot of practices and find the ones that really obviously and clearly have a positive effect in terms of giving you more of this flexibility, more experiences of this sense of expansion.
You said something interesting about the contraction and the expansion, and I immediately started thinking of, the ego frame of thought, where I noticed, I have friends or people that I meet and they struggle with that ego but again, when you just say the contraction or the expansion, I mean, that kind of settles it right in there, because egoic thought system can be very contractive.
Yeah, it's not wrong or bad. It's just small.
It's small. That's great.
Incomplete, and it has a purpose. It's functional within a narrow range.
Yeah.
Just like, knowing the directions to the post office. That's in the greater scheme of things, that's a very small truth. But when you need some more stamps, it's a very profound, it's a profoundly relevant truth, even though it's still just as small. Yeah. So you don't have to avoid the contractions, because there are lots of things in life that are true but not very true.
Right.
And if you experience them, it's good both to discriminate the truth that, that you need to turn right on Main Street to get to the post office, and also keep it in perspective that, if you space out and you find that you've gone right past Main Street, it's usually not the end of the world, because it's still a very small truth. The location of the post office and even that letter you wanted to mail is probably a small truth.
So it's like, I've been listening to a lot of Ram Dass in my past, and he talks a lot about like no leg to stand on. You're just sort of always in that place. And I know at first it feels uncomfortable, and, people want to know like tomorrow in the planning, but personally myself, I've noticed that the less planning, the better I feel.
Yeah. Well, again, there's a place for the small truth of our plans.
Yes.
And by their nature, they're very small truths because there's just so much going on in life, and so many forces and factors and, other people, which you can never quite control for some reason, And so, that's that old joke, the way you make God laugh is tell her your plans, because they are kind of like the punchline of a joke.
Yes.
But it's okay still to realize that they do have, again, within their narrow range, they have some functionality. Yeah. It's nice to be able to make plans. If you just always just show up at the airport with your credit card, there's going to be a lot of times where you wait days before
right.
you catch a plane to San Francisco.
Yeah.
So if you can plan ahead even a few days, there, or sometimes, if you plan ahead a few months, you save hundreds or thousands of dollars on that plane ticket.
So it's a
And at
practical.
the same time, the flexibility. So like when it turns out that, your ticket was on a Boeing aircraft that was banned from flying, and they cancel your flight, it's like, oh, okay, I guess, I need to let go of the small truth of my plans.
Yes.
And see what else is true. That's always, to me, the best approach when something is not very true is not to try to fix it or change it or get rid of it or deny it or reject it. It's just to ask, well, okay, what else is true? If this is only this true, then there's probably a lot of other things that are true. Like that,
Yeah.
I could, I actually could drive to San Francisco from where I live. There's always all these other truths, right? That are also true.
Really key that you said that. Ask. That's a big thing. I'm glad that you said that. A lot of people are like, "Oh, ask." Like what I mean? It just seems like it's not an accessible thing to do, and yet it is. It's ask.
Yeah, that's what in a particular spiritual practice that I had experience with, and that was part of the kind of the tradition I landed in, is self-inquiry, where you always ask the question, "Who am I?" And that's a powerful thing to inquire into, because it's kind of it's like a fundamental aspect. It's a very big truth, the truth of who we are. But that underlying process of inquiry, of asking, of curiosity, you can aim it in every direction. There's no reason to only inquire into what you are and inquire into what everything is, and what's this and what's that and what's this mean and how does that work, and and what's the sensation in my body right now. And, there's nothing that is not worth inquiring into.
So just that massive awareness.
Yeah, it's like letting awareness run wild. Just always being willing to ask, what else is true? What else is here? What else is knowable about this moment or that moment?
So Nirmala, before we finish up, I want to ask you, what would you say your purpose is on this plane at this particular time and space?
It's nice to again hold, because there's always all the other truths, right? To hold any truth lightly. And so if I feel a sense of purpose, I'm probably only, it's like the story of the blind man and the elephant, and one has a hold of the tail. It says an elephant is like a rope, and the other has a hold of the leg and says, no, an elephant is like a tree trunk. So whatever I could say about my purpose would be probably, barely scratching the surface of it. And at the same time, it mostly shows up in like really loving to do what I mentioned earlier, what my wife and I do on the weekends, these Christ consciousness transmissions, where she and I just act as antenna to bring through this force of this truth of consciousness. And it's just very, we're kind of blown away by how much people seem to benefit from it.
They're fantastic.
And so it feels like, you ask, what's my purpose? Well, when I'm doing that, and when we're organizing that, and when we're working towards that, there's this wonderful sense of flow, this wonderful sense of expansion. And so that's probably the clearest indication that it's, at least within the greater scheme of what my purpose in life is.
Yeah, beautiful.
Most of it probably I can't really know consciously.
Right.
Probably most of our purpose in life is the flow of awareness, is to be here and experience.
Be here now, yeah.
Just have all these crazy experiences that make up a human life.
Now, your website is endless-satsang.com.
Yeah, endless-satsang.com.
Okay.
But I was going to say that's a really easy purpose to fulfill.
Yeah.
to be awake, to be aware.
Yeah.
Because there's
Right.
I've asked this of like literally thousands of people. I ask people, so are you aware of anything right now? And every single one, every single person I've ever asked that of has said, yeah. It's like, it's kind of like lowering the bar. Instead of thinking, oh, I have to have this big experience of awareness. It's like saying, are you aware right now?
Right.
And if somebody said no, I would say, well, then how did you hear the question? You must have been aware of the question, or you wouldn't have responded.
Right.
And even if they're like totally daydreaming and off on and I shake them and bring them back and say, no, really, tell me, are you aware of anything? Well, they said, yeah, I was daydreaming. It's like,
I'm aware.
yeah. So if your purpose in life is to have experience, to be aware, to bring awareness to experience, you can't, it's like a big target. You can't miss.
Yeah.
Stub your toe, it still qualifies.
I love it.
I'm sure you're going to be aware of that toe.
Ding. That's awesome. So now, are you still offering private sessions?
Yeah, I still do the one-on-one.
Okay.
I call it non-dual spiritual mentoring.
Okay.
I also offer the Christ consciousness transmission optionally as part of that. During an hour that I meet with people, and if they want to include a one-on-one transmission, we can do that also. Or if they just want to do more of an inquiry, exploration together, we can do that for the whole hour.
Well, I really want to thank you so much. I'm going to have your website and everything on the in post when I do all that, and so people can get a hold of you. And I'm loving the transmissions. I've noticed some major shifts in things that are just kind of cracking and falling off, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, like I said, it's blowing our minds, that's for sure.
I bet. Well, thank you, Nirmala, so much for your time. And when I grow up, I want to be just like you.
All right. Well, when I grow up, I want to be just like whoever you think I am.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Nirmala, and I will be seeing you on the weekend for sure.
All right. You be well.
Thank you. Ciao.
Bye-bye now.
Well, I want to thank Nirmala so much for his time and his awesome energy in the interview today. And again, I look forward to the next time when we be geeking out with you.
Let's talk about life, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the truth and consciousness, divinity. Let's talk about God.